Marcus Reynolds stared at his first-class boarding pass, then at the white pilot blocking his path. "That seat isn't for you," the pilot sneered. Marcus's phone buzzed, a reminder of the board meeting. His eyes narrowed as he recalled the airline's name emblazoned on the documents he'd signed yesterday, Reynolds Global Airlines. Before we dive into this shocking story of discrimination at 30,000 feet, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination while traveling, and subscribe to follow more stories of justice being served. Now let's see what happens when this pilot chose the wrong passenger to discriminate against. The luxurious interior of Terminal A at JFK International Airport bustled with the usual Monday morning chaos. Travelers rushed to gates, baristas called out elaborate coffee orders, and security personnel conducted their routine checks with practiced efficiency. Among the crowd moved Marcus Reynolds, a commanding presence at 6'2", impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. At 42, Marcus had built Reynolds Global Enterprises from the ground up, transforming it from a small logistics company into a multinational corporation with interests spanning technology, transportation, and communications. Today marked a significant milestone, the finalization of his acquisition of Transcontinental Airways, a struggling airline he planned to revitalize under his growing corporate umbrella. Marcus checked his Patek Philippe watch, a gift from his late father who had always told him to own time before it owns you. The board meeting would commence in 3 hours at the corporate headquarters in Manhattan. Plenty of time, assuming the flight departed on schedule. Final boarding call for Transcontinental Airways Flight TC-187 to LaGuardia, announced the pleasant voice over the intercom. Marcus approached Gate 17, his leather briefcase containing acquisition paperwork in one hand, phone in the other, as his executive assistant, Zoe Chen, updated him on last-minute meeting details. "The shareholders are nervous about the maintenance reports," Zoe explained through the phone. "We'll need to address their concerns directly." "Tell them I've already commissioned a complete fleet evaluation," Marcus replied, handing his first-class boarding pass to the gate agent. "The results will be presented today." The gate agent, a young woman named Kimberly according to her nameplate, smiled professionally as she scanned his boarding pass. Her expression faltered momentarily as she glanced from the pass to Marcus, then back again. "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, noting her hesitation. "No, sir. No problem at all. Enjoy your flight, Mr. Reynolds," she replied, though something in her tone suggested otherwise. Marcus nodded and proceeded down the jetway, the familiar pre-meeting tension settling between his shoulder blades. As CEO of a Fortune 500 company, he'd grown accustomed to the weight of responsibility, to making decisions that affected thousands of employees. Today's acquisition would add another 8,000 to that number. Stepping onto the aircraft, Marcus was greeted by a flight attendant whose smile also seemed to falter upon seeing him. "Welcome aboard, sir. First class is—" "I know where it is, thank you," Marcus replied smoothly. Having flown this airline countless times during the acquisition process, he made his way to the first-class cabin, finding his assigned seat, 2A, a window seat with extra legroom. As he stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment, he noticed several white passengers watching him with undisguised curiosity. Marcus had long ago learned to ignore such stares. Success was his best response to prejudice. Just as he was about to sit down, a voice spoke from behind him. "Excuse me." Marcus turned to find himself facing Captain William Severson, recognizable by the 4 stripes on his uniform sleeves and the authoritative tilt of his chin. At around 50, Severson had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the sky, his gray hair cropped short beneath his cap, his blue eyes sharp and evaluating. "Can I help you, Captain?" Marcus asked. Severson glanced at the seat, then back at Marcus. "There seems to be some confusion. First class is reserved for premium passengers." The subtle emphasis on premium wasn't lost on Marcus. Neither was the implication. "I'm aware of that," Marcus replied, producing his boarding pass from his jacket pocket. "Seat 2A." Severson barely glanced at the pass. "There must be a mistake at the gate. We're expecting a Mr. Reynolds in this seat. Marcus Reynolds. I am Marcus Reynolds, he stated calmly, decades of boardroom negotiations having trained him to maintain composure when others sought to provoke him. The captain's expression hardened with disbelief. Do you have identification to verify that? Around them, the first-class cabin had grown quiet, other passengers openly watching the exchange. In economy, boarding continued as usual. Passengers filing past, some slowing to observe the developing situation. Marcus maintained steady eye contact with Severson as he removed his wallet and extracted his driver's license, aware that as one of the few black CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, this was far from the first time his identity or belonging had been questioned. Severson examined the license with exaggerated care, his frown deepening. This says you're from Atlanta. The Marcus Reynolds expected in this seat is a CEO from New York. I was born in Atlanta. I live in New York, Marcus explained, his patience thinning. I am the CEO of Reynolds Global Enterprises, headquartered in Manhattan. Severson handed back the license with obvious reluctance. Nevertheless, there appears to be a seating issue. I'll need you to return to the gate for clarification. A flight attendant named Diane hovered nearby, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene against her captain. Marcus took a deliberate breath. Captain Severson, my boarding pass assigns me to this seat. My identification confirms I am Marcus Reynolds. There is no confusion except the one you're creating. Sir, I'm responsible for everyone's safety on this aircraft, and part of that is ensuring passengers are in their assigned seats, Severson insisted, his tone growing more condescending. Now, I need you to deplane and sort this out with the gate agents. Marcus noted the businessman, across the aisle, white around 60, wearing a golf polo under a blazer, who had boarded just before him with no scrutiny whatsoever. He also noticed how the man was now studiously avoiding looking in their direction. Captain, Marcus began, his voice low but firm. I understand you have responsibilities. So do I. I have a meeting to attend regarding the future of this very airline. I've been assigned this seat, I've paid for this seat, and legally I'm entitled to this seat. Your continued refusal to acknowledge this fact despite clear evidence suggests other motivations. Severson's face flushed red. Are you accusing me of something? I'm stating facts, Marcus replied. Now, unless you have a valid reason supported by airline policy to remove me from this flight, I suggest we allow boarding to complete so we can depart on schedule. The tension between them was palpable. Another flight attendant had joined Diane, both watching nervously as their captain squared off with a first-class passenger. I don't know how you got that boarding pass, Severson said, lowering his voice to a near whisper. But people like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft. The words hung in the air between them, blatant in their meaning. Marcus felt a familiar burn of anger, quickly controlled and channeled. Throughout his career, he'd encountered men like Severson, men who couldn't see past their own prejudice, who felt threatened by black excellence, who abused whatever small authority they possessed to reinforce outdated hierarchies. Captain? Severson, Marcus said, his voice steady. I'm going to take my assigned seat now. If you wish to prevent that, you'll need to call security and explain to them, the airline, and potentially a court why you're discriminating against a passenger with valid documentation. Severson's jaw tightened as he calculated his options. Around them, passengers were growing restless, the scheduled departure time approaching. This isn't over, Severson muttered, turning abruptly and heading toward the cockpit. Marcus finally took his seat, outwardly calm while his mind raced. He pulled out his phone, sending a quick text to Zoe. Possible delay. Captain Severson, creating issues. Her response came seconds later. The pilot? He's mentioned in the personnel files as having 3 previous complaints for discriminatory behavior. Never disciplined. This information didn't surprise Marcus. What did surprise him was his own restraint. 10 years ago, he might have responded differently, might have allowed anger to dictate his actions. Now he understood the power of patience, of strategic response, rather than immediate reaction. Diane approached cautiously. Mr. Reynolds, can I get you anything before takeoff? Water? Coffee? Her nervousness was evident. caught between her captain's obvious prejudice and her training to serve first-class passengers properly. "Water would be fine, thank you," Marcus replied, offering a reassuring smile. "And perhaps the name of your customer service director when you have a moment." Diane nodded, relief crossing her features at his calm demeanor. "Of course, sir. Right away." As she hurried off, Marcus turned his attention to the window, watching ground crews loading final cargo, his mind already formulating a response to Severson's behavior. The acquisition paperwork in his briefcase suddenly held new significance. In 12 minutes, Marcus Reynolds would make a decision that would change not just his day, but the entire future of Transcontinental Airways and Captain William Severson. The cabin pressure seemed to intensify as Marcus sat perfectly still in his first-class seat, the leather cool against his palms. Outside his window, baggage handlers loaded the last pieces of luggage into the aircraft's belly, unaware of the storm brewing inside. Flight attendant Diane returned with his water, placing it carefully on his armrest along with a cocktail napkin. "Mr. Reynolds," she whispered, glancing nervously toward the cockpit. "Our customer relations director is Alicia Watkins. Her direct line is written here." She slid a small business card beneath the napkin. Marcus nodded appreciatively. "Thank you, Diane." As she moved away, Marcus picked up the card, noting that Diane had scribbled, "I'm sorry," beneath the printed contact information. He tucked it into his jacket pocket, then retrieved his phone and opened his secure email application. The digital signature on the Transcontinental Airways acquisition was scheduled for 10 a.m., 2 hours from now. The contracts were finalized, waiting only for his electronic approval to transfer ownership of the struggling airline to Reynolds Global Enterprises. What Captain Severson didn't realize was that technically, Marcus already controlled the airline. The board had approved the sale last week. Today was merely the formality of execution. Marcus typed a message to his chief legal officer, Rebecca Zhang. "Immediate review needed of personnel file. Captain William Severson, Transcontinental Airways. Delay signature on acquisition until my arrival. Potential restructuring required." Rebecca's response arrived within seconds. "Accessing now. Do we have a problem?" Marcus glanced toward the cockpit door, where Severson was conferring with another crew member, occasionally throwing glances in Marcus's direction. "We have an opportunity for immediate cultural correction," Marcus replied. "Stand by." He switched to another thread, this one with Zoe and his COO James Watkins. "James, upon signature of TA acquisition, I want immediate implementation of executive decision-making authority. Prepare HR and PR for potential turbulence." As Marcus composed these messages, the final passengers boarded, filling the economy section. The main cabin door remained open as Severson emerged from the cockpit, now accompanied by a ground supervisor, wearing a high-visibility vest over his airline uniform. They proceeded directly to Marcus's seat. "Mr. Reynolds," the supervisor began, his tone professional if strained. "I'm Thomas Griffin, Ground Operations Supervisor. Captain Severson has expressed concerns about my presence in this seat," Marcus finished for him. "Despite my valid boarding pass and identification confirming I am indeed Marcus Reynolds." Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the captain has final authority over all aspects of flight operations, including passenger seating arrangements." "For safety reasons," Marcus added. "Not for personal prejudice." Griffin's eyes widened slightly at the directness of the accusation. Severson stepped forward. "This has nothing to do with—" "Captain," Marcus interrupted calmly. "In approximately 12 minutes, I will be signing documents that make me the owner of Transcontinental Airways, your employer. Every decision you make in the next 12 minutes will be scrutinized with that context in mind." The color drained from Severson's face. "You're bluffing." Marcus raised an eyebrow, then turned his phone screen toward them, displaying the acquisition agreement with its pending digital signature line, clearly visible. "Am I?" Griffin, processing this information faster than the captain, took a small step backward. "Mr. Reynolds, I wasn't informed that the acquisition was proceeding today." "Few were," Marcus replied. "Corporate transitions of this magnitude are typically handled discreetly until formal announcement." He turned his attention back to Severson. "Now, Captain, you have a choice. You can return to the cockpit. operate this flight professionally to LaGuardia, and we can discuss your behavior during my onboarding review of senior staff. Or you can continue this discriminatory treatment, in which case, my first act as owner will be addressing it directly. The first-class cabin had gone completely silent. Even passengers still settling in economy seemed to sense the tension, conversations diminishing to whispers. Severson's expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally a grudging calculation of self-interest. Without another word, he turned and stalked back to the cockpit. Griffin lingered, clearly unsure how to proceed in this unprecedented situation. "Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of the airline, I want to apologize for any—" "Save it," Marcus said, not unkindly. "Apologies without action are meaningless. Better to demonstrate change behavior than offer empty words." Griffin nodded stiffly and followed Severson toward the front of the aircraft. Marcus returned to his phone, finding a new message from Rebecca. Severson's file contains 3 previous complaints of discriminatory behavior toward Black and Latino passengers, all dismissed by previous management. Also noted, consistent, resistance to diversity initiatives and documented incidents of creating hostile environment for minority crew members. Marcus wasn't surprised. Men like Severson rarely limited their prejudice to isolated incidents. It was typically a pattern, enabled by systems that prioritized protection of the status quo over accountability. The aircraft door finally closed. Diane began the safety demonstration while another flight attendant secured the cabin for departure. Marcus felt the familiar push as the plane backed away from the gate. His phone buzzed one final time before he would need to switch to airplane mode. "CEO office prepared for immediate action upon your command. Legal standing by. PR draft statements ready for multiple scenarios." James was nothing if not efficient. Marcus sent a final reply. "Hold positions. Decision pending arrival." As the aircraft taxied toward the runway, Marcus closed his eyes, not in resignation, but in focused contemplation. Throughout his career, he had faced countless moments like this. Moments where racism attempted to diminish his humanity, his accomplishments, his very presence in spaces others felt he didn't belong. Early in his career, he had responded with anger, then later with strategic silence, picking his battles carefully as he climbed corporate ladders. But now, having reached heights few Black executives had achieved, he recognized a different responsibility. It wasn't enough to succeed within broken systems. True leadership meant fixing those systems, creating spaces where others wouldn't face the same barriers. Captain Severson represented more than just one prejudiced individual. He represented institutional tolerance for behavior that should have been addressed long ago. And in 12 minutes, Marcus would have the power to address it not just for himself, but for every passenger and employee who had suffered similar treatment without his resources or authority to respond. The engines roared as they accelerated down the runway. As the aircraft lifted into the morning sky, Marcus made his decision. The aircraft leveled at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off and Marcus Reynolds remained perfectly still, eyes closed, fingers steepled beneath his chin. To casual observers, he might have appeared to be napping. Another executive, catching a few moments of rest between meetings. In reality, his mind raced through scenarios, weighing options and consequences with the precision that had built his business empire. Flight attendant Diane approached cautiously. "Mr. Reynolds, may I offer you a beverage or snack?" Marcus opened his eyes, offering a genuine smile that momentarily masked the calculations behind it. "Coffee, Black, thank you. And perhaps any available information on our estimated arrival time?" "We're scheduled to land at LaGuardia in approximately 45 minutes, sir," she replied, relief evident in her voice at his continued civility, despite the earlier confrontation. As Diane moved to prepare his coffee, Marcus activated his tablet connecting to the aircraft's Wi-Fi. A notification appeared immediately, a priority message from his executive team awaiting his attention. The video conference connected instantly, revealing a boardroom at Reynolds Global headquarters. Seated around the polished table were Rebecca Chang, his chief legal officer, James Watkins, COO, Zoe Chen, his executive assistant, and Tanya Williams, head of public relations. Their expressions ranged from concerned to intrigued. "I assume you've all been briefed on the situation," Marcus began without preamble. Rebecca nodded. "We've pulled Severson's complete file. It's worse than initial reports suggested. 7 complaints over 12 years, all with racial undertones, all dismissed by previous management. There's also evidence of retaliatory scheduling against crew members who reported his behavior. The acquisition papers are ready for your digital signature," James added. "We can execute the moment you give the word." Marcus considered this information. "What's the crew composition on today's flight?" Zoe consulted her tablet. First Officer Lisa Kwan, Asian American, 5 years with the airline. 3 flight attendants: Diane Johnson, black, 15 years of service; Miguel Rodriguez, Latino, 7 years; and Sarah Peterson, white, 3 years. "And has Captain Severson had documented issues with any of them specifically?" Rebecca consulted her notes. "Diane filed a complaint 2 years ago alleging hostile work environment, dismissed for insufficient evidence. First Officer Kwan requested transfer from Severson's regular crew rotation last year but was denied. The pieces fell into place. Not just a single incident, but a pattern protected by institutional indifference. The very culture Marcus had intended to transform through the acquisition. Options," Marcus stated simply. James leaned forward. "From an operational standpoint, we have 3 viable approaches. 1. Proceed with acquisition as planned. Address Severson's behavior through normal channels after transition. 2. Delay acquisition pending further investigation. 3. Execute acquisition immediately and take immediate action regarding Severson." Tanya, ever conscious of public perception, added, "If we proceed with option 3, we need to consider potential backlash. Pilot unions are powerful, and some may frame this as an overreaction to a misunderstanding rather than a response to documented pattern of behavior." "And if this incident becomes public?" Marcus asked. "Then we control the narrative," Tanya replied confidently. "We have documentation of multiple incidents. This becomes a story about accountability, not retaliation." Marcus nodded. "Decision. Crystallizing. Execute the acquisition now. Prepare termination paperwork for Captain Severson effective immediately upon landing. Contact LaGuardia Operations to arrange for a replacement captain for the return flight." The team moved with practiced efficiency, fingers flying across keyboards. "Marcus," Rebecca cautioned, "legal wants to ensure we're on solid ground here. Termination of a captain mid-rotation is unprecedented. So is having the CEO of the company discriminated against by his own pilot," Marcus replied evenly. "We're not terminating him for this incident alone. We're terminating him for a documented pattern of behavior that previous management chose to ignore. The fact that I experienced it personally simply brought it to light more quickly." Diane returned with his coffee, placing it carefully on his tray table. Marcus thanked her, then asked, "Diane, would it be possible to speak with First Officer Kwan briefly? A quick professional matter." Surprise flickered across Diane's features, quickly masked by professional composure. "I'll check if that's possible, sir." As she moved toward the cockpit, Zoe's voice came through Marcus's tablet. "Acquisition execution complete. Reynolds Global Enterprises is now officially the owner of Transcontinental Airways. Legal has transmitted formal notification to the current executive team and board." "Perfect timing," Marcus murmured as the cockpit door opened and First Officer Lisa Kwan emerged. She approached Marcus's seat with the cautious professionalism of someone unsure why a passenger had requested her presence. "Mr. Reynolds? I'm First Officer Kwan. How can I help you?" Marcus gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Please join me for a moment if you can." She glanced toward the cockpit, then sat, her posture rigid with professional distance. "First Officer Kwan, I'm Marcus Reynolds, CEO of Reynolds Global Enterprises. As of approximately 30 seconds ago, we have completed acquisition of Transcontinental Airways." Kwan's eyes widened slightly, but her composure remained intact. "I see. Congratulations, sir. Are you familiar with Captain Severson's interaction with me prior to takeoff?" Marcus asked directly. A flicker of discomfort crossed her features. "I observed part of it, yes." And in your professional opinion, was his behavior consistent with company policy and professional standards? Kwon hesitated, loyalty to her captain warring with professional ethics. Sir, with all due respect, that puts me in a difficult position. I understand, Marcus said gently. Let me approach this differently. Are you aware that as of now, I am effectively your employer? Yes, sir. And are you aware that we have accessed Captain Severson's personnel file, including the request you made last year to be transferred from his crew rotation? Color drained from Kwon's face. That was supposed to be confidential. It should have been properly addressed, Marcus corrected. The fact that it wasn't reflects the culture we're committed to changing. First Officer Kwon, I'm asking for your professional assessment because I respect your expertise and experience, not to put you in an uncomfortable position. Kwon took a steadying breath. Captain Severson's behavior toward you was unprofessional and inconsistent with both company policy and FAA guidelines regarding passenger treatment. It's not the first such incident I've witnessed. Marcus nodded. Thank you for your honesty. Now I have a rather unusual request. Upon landing at LaGuardia, Captain Severson will be relieved of his duties. Permanently. We'll have a replacement captain for the return flight, but I'd like you to take command for landing. Kwon's professional mask slipped, revealing genuine shock. Sir, that's highly irregular. Captains don't typically transfer command except in emergencies. Consider this an emergency of corporate culture, Marcus replied. You're fully qualified to land this aircraft, correct? Of course, but then the only obstacle is Captain Severson himself. I believe we can overcome that obstacle. The implicit power of his new position hung between them. Kwon studied him carefully, perhaps assessing whether this new owner would be better or worse than previous management. What exactly are you asking me to do, Mr. Reynolds? Simply be prepared to take command when requested. I'll handle the rest. After a moment's consideration, Kwon nodded once. I'll be ready. As she returned to the cockpit, Marcus's tablet chimed with an incoming message. The termination paperwork was complete, requiring only his signature. With a single tap, he authorized it. His phone buzzed with a text from Tanya. PR statement drafted. Key message. Reynolds Global begins ownership with commitment to zero tolerance for discrimination at all levels. Marcus approved it with a simple, execute. The seatbelt sign illuminated as the aircraft began its initial descent into LaGuardia. Marcus secured his tablet and finished his coffee, a sense of calm purpose replacing his earlier controlled anger. This wasn't just about one incident or one prejudiced pilot. It was about setting the tone for his entire ownership, establishing from day one that accountability would apply at every level, that no position was too powerful to escape responsibility for discriminatory behavior. What would you do if you were in Marcus's position? Would you confront discrimination head-on like he's about to, or handle it through traditional corporate channels after landing? Comment number 1 if you believe immediate action is necessary when facing discrimination, or number 2, if you think a more measured approach would be better. Like this video if you've ever witnessed someone abuse their authority, and subscribe to see more stories of accountability in action. Now, as the plane descends toward New York, what will happen when Captain Severson discovers he's no longer in command of the aircraft or his career? The aircraft descended through scattered clouds, Manhattan's iconic skyline visible through the left side windows. Marcus's seatbelt was fastened, his documents secured, mind focused on the confrontation to come. The plane banked gently, beginning its approach pattern to LaGuardia. His phone vibrated with an incoming message from Rebecca. Security and HR representatives positioned at arrival gate. Media alerted to significant announcement regarding new ownership. All legal documents in order. Marcus acknowledged with a simple thumbs-up emoji, a rare departure from his typically formal communication style. The situation warranted a touch of humanity amidst the corporate machinery now in motion. The aircraft's intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Severson. We've begun our final approach into LaGuardia Airport. Weather at our destination is clear. Temperature 68 degrees. We'll be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare cabin for arrival. Marcus unbuckled his seatbelt and stood, drawing surprised glances from nearby passengers and an immediate response from Diane. "Sir, the seatbelt sign is illuminated. I need to ask you to remain seated," she said, professional but firm. "I understand," Marcus replied quietly. "However, I need to speak with Captain Severson immediately on a matter affecting this aircraft." Confusion crossed Diane's features. "Sir, the captain can't be disturbed during landing procedures. This concerns the operation of the aircraft," Marcus insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Please inform the captain that the owner of Transcontinental Airways needs to speak with him immediately." Her eyes widened at the revelation, but years of training took over. "One moment, sir." As Diane hurried to the cockpit, murmurs spread through the first-class cabin. Marcus remained standing, projecting the calm authority that had seen him through countless high-stakes business negotiations. The cockpit door opened moments later, revealing a clearly agitated Captain Severson. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Return to your seat immediately." "Captain Severson," Marcus began, his voice measured but carrying throughout the now silent cabin. "As of 23 minutes ago, Reynolds Global Enterprises has completed its acquisition of Transcontinental Airways. As CEO and controlling owner, I am informing you that effective immediately, you are relieved of command of this aircraft." Severson's face flushed crimson. "This is absurd. You can't relieve a captain in the middle of a flight. This is a safety violation." "Actually," Marcus countered, removing a document from his inside pocket and unfolding it. "According to Federal Aviation Regulations and Transcontinental's own operations manual, the owner or designated representative of an airline may relieve any employee of duties for cause, provided qualified personnel are available for replacement. First Officer Kwan is fully qualified to land this aircraft." Severson looked around wildly, noting the passengers watching the exchange with rapt attention, many now recording with their phones. "This is revenge for earlier. You can't do this." "This isn't about revenge, Captain," Marcus replied, keeping his voice even. "This is about accountability. Your personnel file shows 7 formal complaints of discriminatory behavior over 12 years. Previous management failed to address this pattern. I will not make the same mistake." He extended the document, Severson's termination notice, toward the captain. "You're being terminated for cause, effective immediately. First Officer Kwan will complete this flight. Security will escort you from the aircraft upon arrival." Severson made no move to take the document, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "You have no right." "I have every right," Marcus interrupted. "As does every passenger who boards one of my aircraft to expect fair and equal treatment, regardless of their race. As do your fellow crew members who have filed complaints about your hostile behavior toward them." First Officer Kwan had appeared in the cockpit doorway behind Severson, her expression a professional mask despite the unprecedented situation. "Lisa," Severson turned to her, "tell him this is impossible. We're on final approach." "Captain," she replied formally, "I am qualified and prepared to complete this landing. For the safety of everyone on board, I suggest you comply with the owner's directive." The betrayal Severson clearly felt was written across his features. His gaze darted between Marcus, Kwan, and the document still extended toward him. "This is my aircraft," he said, voice dropping dangerously. "No," Marcus corrected. "It's my aircraft, and you've demonstrated you're not fit to command it." For a tense moment, it seemed Severson might physically resist. Marcus maintained steady eye contact, neither advancing nor retreating. Then Diane stepped forward. "Captain Severson," she said quietly, "I was there when you told Mr. Reynolds that people like him don't belong in first class. I've been there for similar comments to other passengers. Please don't make this worse." The fight seemed to drain from Severson, replaced by cold fury. He snatched the termination notice from Marcus's hand. "You'll hear from my union representatives and my lawyers." "I look forward to showing them your file," Marcus replied evenly. "Now please step aside and allow First Officer Kwan to safely complete this flight." Severson's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before he turned to Kwan. "The aircraft is yours, First Officer." The words were correct, but the tone dripped with resentment. Kwan nodded professionally. I have the aircraft, Captain. She turned to Marcus. Mr. Reynolds, for safety purposes, I need to ask you to return to your seat now. Of course, Marcus replied, moving back to his seat and fastening his seatbelt. Severson remained standing at the front of the cabin, document crumpled in his fist, the weight of his terminated career visibly settling on his shoulders. Diane gently touched his arm. Sir, please take a seat for landing. After a long moment, Severson moved woodenly to an empty flight attendant jump seat near the cockpit, strapping himself in with mechanical motions. The intercom activated again, this time with Kwan's voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Kwan speaking. I will be completing our arrival into LaGuardia this morning. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare for arrival. As the aircraft continued its descent, Marcus closed his eyes briefly, not in relief, but in acknowledgement of necessity. Throughout his career, he had tried to avoid using his power in ways that could be perceived as personal. He had built his reputation on fair dealing and strategic vision, not on public confrontations or punitive actions, but some moments required direct intervention. Some behaviors could not wait for committee reviews or HR processes. As the new owner of an airline serving thousands of passengers daily, he needed to establish immediately that discrimination would not be tolerated at any level. His phone vibrated again, a message from James. Replacement captain confirmed for return flight. Media gathering at terminal. Statements prepared. The aircraft's landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk. Through his window, Marcus could see the approaching runway, the morning sun glinting off the East River beyond. This incident would make headlines by afternoon. Some would praise his decisive action. Others would criticize what they'd perceive as an abuse of newly acquired power. The pilots' union would almost certainly file grievances. But Marcus knew with absolute certainty that every employee of what was now Reynolds Global Airlines would understand from day one. Discrimination had no place in his organization, regardless of seniority or position. The aircraft touched down smoothly, a testament to First Officer Kwan's skills. As they taxied toward the terminal, Marcus noticed Severson staring at him with undisguised hatred. He met the gaze calmly, neither gloating nor apologetic. When they reached the gate and the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers began gathering their belongings, many still casting curious glances toward the front of the aircraft, where tension remained palpable. The aircraft door opened, revealing 2 security officers and a woman in a corporate suit. Vanessa Morris, Transcontinental's HR director, now a Reynolds Global employee. They stepped aboard, approaching Severson with professional detachment. Captain Severson, Morris began, please come with us. Severson stood slowly, straightening his uniform in a final gesture of dignity. As he moved toward the exit, he paused beside Marcus's seat. You have no idea what you've done, he said, voice low and tight with controlled rage. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Actually, Captain, I know exactly what I've done. I've enforced a standard that should have been enforced long ago. Severson's nostrils flared, but with security officers waiting, he said nothing more, continuing down the aisle and off the aircraft. As passengers began to deplane, First Officer Kwan emerged from the cockpit, approaching Marcus with professional composure despite the unprecedented situation she'd just navigated. Thank you for your professionalism, First Officer, Marcus said, standing to greet her properly. Just doing my job, sir, she replied, though the slight tremor in her voice betrayed the stress of the situation. May I ask what happens now? Now, Marcus said, we begin building the airline we should have had all along. One where captains are evaluated on their skills and professionalism, not protected despite their prejudices. He extended his hand. I'd like you to be part of that process, if you're willing. Kwan regarded his hand for a moment before shaking it firmly. I believe I am, Mr. Reynolds. As Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to deplane, he was acutely aware that this was just the opening move in a much larger transformation. Changing company culture wouldn't happen with a single firing, no matter how public or justified. It would require sustained commitment, structural changes, and consistent enforcement of new standards. But sometimes, Change needed a catalyst, HAB, clear demonstration that the old rules no longer applied. As he stepped off the aircraft into the terminal where reporters were already gathering, Marcus Reynolds was prepared to be that catalyst, not just for one airline, but for an industry long overdue for transformation. The moment Marcus Reynolds stepped into LaGuardia's Terminal B, he could feel the shift in the air, that electric tension that signaled media presence. Zoe Chen materialized at his side as if conjured, her tablet already displaying incoming press requests. "They're waiting in the executive lounge," she murmured, falling into step beside him. 17 media outlets confirmed, more incoming. Social media's already buzzing. Passengers uploaded videos before we even taxied to the gate. Marcus nodded, neither pleased nor disturbed by the developing storm. Throughout his career, he had learned to neither court nor fear media attention. It was simply another current to navigate. "Is the team in place?" he asked, straightening his already immaculate tie. "Full executive response team assembled. Tanya has prepared 3 statement options depending on your preferred approach. Legal has vetted all of them." Zoe's efficiency remained unmatched, her calm demeanor a perfect complement to high-pressure situations. They moved through the terminal, turning heads as they passed. Marcus had long ago grown accustomed to the stares, some curious, some admiring, some hostile. At 6'2" with the build of the college athlete he once was, dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, he naturally commanded attention. Add to that, the growing recognition factor as one of the few black CEOs of a Fortune 500 company, and anonymity was impossible. Today, he could distinguish a new quality in the glances: recognition. News traveled fast, videos traveled faster. A security team from Reynolds Global met them at a private elevator, escorting them to the executive level where the newly acquired airline maintained its airport offices. The familiar weight of responsibility settled across Marcus's shoulders as they ascended, not just for his company, but for what his actions represented. The elevator doors opened to reveal a hive of coordinated activity. Reynolds Global personnel had integrated seamlessly with transcontinental staff, creating command centers for media response, employee communication, and operational continuity. At the center stood James Watkins, COO, directing the orchestra, with practiced precision. "Marcus," James acknowledged, breaking away to approach them. "Everything's proceeding according to protocol. Captain Severson has been escorted from the premises. His union rep has already called twice. First Officer Kwan has been debriefed and is prepared to take the return flight as captain if you approve." "I do," Marcus confirmed. "What's the temperature?" James understood the shorthand. Marcus wanted the emotional barometer of the situation, not just operational facts. "Mixed, as expected. Severson has supporters, particularly among the old guard. But we're seeing significant positive response from cabin crews and ground staff. The videos from the flight are resonating, especially his comment about people like you not belonging in first class." Marcus absorbed this information with a thoughtful nod. "And our ownership announcement?" "Scheduled for noon, though the termination has obviously accelerated awareness. The markets are already responding. Our stock is up 3 points on the news." Rebecca Zhang approached, legal folders tucked under her arm. "Marcus, we need 10 minutes before the press conference to review potential legal challenges. The pilots' union is already positioning this as procedurally improper. They would have preferred I wait until we landed, file a complaint, allow it to be investigated over months, then potentially take action after review committees and hearings," Marcus observed dryly. "Precisely," Rebecca confirmed. "They're calling it an abuse of ownership authority." "Which it technically was," Marcus acknowledged without remorse. "Sometimes technical violations are necessary to address moral ones." Rebecca's slight smile conveyed her agreement, though as chief legal officer, she couldn't explicitly endorse extra procedural actions. "The replacement captain has arrived," Zoe interjected, checking her tablet. "Captain Jimenez, 20-year veteran, excellent record. He's been briefed and is preparing for the return flight." Marcus glanced at his watch. 30 minutes until the scheduled press conference. "Let's move to the conference room. I want to speak with Captain Jimenez before we face the media." The group navigated through the bustling office to a glass-walled conference room where a man in a pilot's uniform waited. Captain Eduardo Jimenez rose as they entered, mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and the confident bearing of an experienced aviator. "Mr. Reynolds," he greeted, extending his hand. "Quite the first day of new ownership." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Not how I planned it, Captain Jimenez, but necessary nonetheless." "I've flown with Severson," Jimenez said, his expression carefully neutral. "What happened today has been building for years. You don't seem surprised. That he finally faced consequences? I'm surprised it took this long." Jimenez's professional reserve cracked slightly, revealing genuine emotion. "Sir, I've been with this airline 22 years. I've watched qualified people passed over, complaints ignored, and standards applied unequally. Many of us have been waiting for someone to finally address it." Marcus studied him thoughtfully. "Then you understand why immediate action was necessary." "I do." Jimenez hesitated, then added, "The question many of us are asking. Is this a one-time response to your personal experience, or the beginning of genuine change?" The directness of the question, the subtle challenge embedded within it, earned Jimenez a new measure of respect in Marcus's estimation. "A fair question, Captain. The answer is that today is day one of a complete cultural overhaul. I didn't acquire this airline to maintain its status quo." Marcus turned to James. "In fact, I'd like to accelerate our planned diversity audit and leadership review. Move the timeline up from 30 days to immediate implementation." James nodded, making notes. "That will require pulling resources from other initiatives." "Do it. This is now our priority." Marcus turned back to Jimenez. "Captain, I'll need officers like you, those with experience and integrity, to help lead this transition. Are you willing to take a more active role?" Jimenez straightened almost imperceptibly. "What exactly are you proposing, sir?" "Initially, I need you to speak with the press after our conference. As a longtime captain, your perspective on today's events will carry weight with both the public and other pilots. Long-term, I'd like you to consider joining our newly formed Ethics and Standards Committee." The request clearly caught Jimenez off guard. "That's not typically a role offered to active pilots." "Exactly the problem," Marcus replied. "Those responsible for enforcing standards have been too removed from daily operations. That changes today." Tanya Williams, PR director, entered the conference room, her expression conveying both urgency and excitement. "Marcus, we need to move up the press conference. The videos have gone viral. Over 2 million views in the last 20 minutes. Every major network is running with it." Marcus wasn't surprised. In the social media age, a black CEO confronting racial discrimination by grounding a plane and firing the pilot wasn't just news. It was digital wildfire. "Show me the most viewed clip," he requested. Tanya handed him her tablet, where a video was already queued up. The footage, clearly taken by a first-class passenger, captured Severson's confrontation with Marcus, including the damning line, "People like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft." Marcus handed the tablet back. "We proceed as planned, just accelerated." "Tanya, position Captain Jimenez for secondary remarks following my statement. Rebecca, prepare a summary of Severson's file, redacted appropriately, for limited media distribution. James, contact First Officer Kwan. I want her promoted to captain effective immediately." The team dispersed to execute his directives, leaving Marcus momentarily alone with his thoughts. He moved to the window overlooking the tarmac where the aircraft from his morning flight sat at its gate. Soon it would depart again under Captain Jimenez's command, continuing its scheduled service as if today were ordinary. But today was far from ordinary. It represented a seismic shift, not just for one airline, but potentially for an industry where discriminatory behavior had too often been addressed through internal processes designed more to protect companies than to create genuine accountability. His phone vibrated with an incoming call from an unknown number. Normally, Marcus would let such calls go to voicemail, but something prompted him to answer. "Reynolds speaking." "Mr. Reynolds." The voice was female, elderly but strong. "My name is Eleanor Severson. William Severson is my son." Marcus's grip tightened slightly on the phone. Mrs. Severson. I saw what happened on the news. She continued. I wanted to tell you personally that while William is my son and I love him, what he did was inexcusable. Of all the reactions Marcus had anticipated to today's events, this was not among them. Mrs. Severson, I appreciate your call, but please let me finish. William's father, my late husband, was cut from the same cloth. For 40 years, I watched that man treat people terribly because of their race, and I said nothing. I told myself it wasn't my place to correct him. I've watched my son follow the same path, and I've remained silent too long. Marcus found himself genuinely moved by the woman's candor. That couldn't have been an easy call to make. It wasn't, she acknowledged. But right is right. My son needs to face consequences for his actions. Maybe finally he'll learn what I failed to teach him. After ending the call, Marcus stood in contemplative silence, processing this unexpected perspective. The easy narrative was to view Severson as a one-dimensional villain, a racist pilot who finally faced justice. But reality was always more complex. Severson was also someone's son, perhaps someone's father or husband, a man whose prejudices were likely taught rather than innate. This didn't excuse his behavior or change the necessity of Marcus's response, but it reminded him that lasting change required addressing systems and cultures, not just removing individuals. Zoe appeared at the door. They're ready for you, Marcus. He nodded, centering himself for what would likely be one of the most significant media appearances of his career. As he followed Zoe toward the press area, his phone buzzed with a text message from his father. Saw the news. Proud of you, son. Remember what I always told you. Power isn't about what you can do. It's about what you should do. Marcus smiled slightly at his father's timely wisdom. Joseph Reynolds had built a small trucking company from nothing, facing discrimination at every turn in 1970s Georgia. He had taught Marcus that success wasn't just about personal achievement, but about creating space for others to follow. Today, Marcus had done exactly that. Not because he had been discriminated against, he had faced far worse over the years and simply moved forward, but because his position now gave him the power to address it systemically. As he approached the room filled with reporters and cameras, Marcus straightened his shoulders, prepared to explain not just what he had done, but why it mattered. Why one CEO's response to discrimination represented more than an isolated incident or personal vendetta. It represented a new standard, that no position was too powerful to escape accountability for prejudice, and no corporation too large to confront discrimination directly. The conference room buzzed with activity as Marcus entered, cameras clicking rapidly, reporters leaning forward in anticipation. The Reynolds Global logo had been hastily erected behind the podium, alongside the Transcontinental Airways emblem. Visual confirmation of the acquisition now accelerated into public awareness. Tanya Williams stepped to the microphone first, her poise unflappable as she addressed the assembled media. Good morning. As you're aware, Reynolds Global Enterprises has completed its acquisition of Transcontinental Airways, effective immediately. CEO Marcus Reynolds will make a brief statement regarding this morning's incident aboard Flight TC-187, after which he'll take limited questions. Please hold all questions until invited. She stepped aside, yielding the podium to Marcus. Camera flashes intensified as he took position, his expression serious but composed. Thank you for joining us on short notice, he began. This morning, as a passenger aboard Transcontinental Airways Flight TC-187, I experienced discriminatory treatment from Captain William Severson when attempting to take my assigned first-class seat. Despite presenting valid identification and boarding documentation, I was told, and I quote, "People like you don't belong in first class on my aircraft." Marcus paused, letting the words hang in the air. As a private citizen, I might have filed a complaint and hoped for appropriate action, but as of this morning, I am not just a passenger but the chief executive and controlling owner of Transcontinental Airways. Therefore, I was uniquely positioned to take immediate action regarding behavior that violates both federal transportation regulations and basic human dignity. He gestured to Rebecca, who distributed packets to the front row reporters. These redacted personnel files show that Captain Severson has been the subject of 7 formal discrimination complaints over his 12-year tenure, none of which resulted in significant disciplinary action under previous management. This represents not just individual prejudice, but institutional failure to address repeated violations of company policy and federal employment law. Marcus's tone remained measured, neither defensive nor apologetic. Captain Severson has been terminated, effective immediately. This is not a decision based solely on his treatment of me, but on a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior that previous management failed to address appropriately. In addition, we are launching a comprehensive review of all similar complaints across the organization, with zero tolerance for discriminatory conduct at any level. The room remained unusually quiet, reporters scribbling notes rather than shouting questions, a testament to the gravity of the situation. Let me be absolutely clear. Reynolds Global's acquisition of Transcontinental was never intended to be merely financial. It was always about transformation, creating an airline where every passenger and employee is treated with equal respect, regardless of race, gender, orientation, or background. Today's events simply accelerated the timeline for that transformation. Marcus looked directly into the primary camera. I will now take questions. Hands shot up immediately. Marcus nodded to a woman in the front row. Christine Lawson, Aviation Today. Mr. Reynolds, the Airline Pilots Association is already calling this an abuse of corporate power and an improper circumvention of established disciplinary procedures. How do you respond? I respect the association's role in protecting pilots' due process rights, Marcus replied. However, those rights do not include protection from consequences for documented discriminatory behavior. Captain Severson was not terminated based on today's incident alone, but on a pattern established over years. The only procedural abnormality was that accountability finally occurred. He pointed to another reporter. Michael Chen, CNBC. Was this action personal retaliation, rather than corporate policy enforcement? Marcus had anticipated this question. If I were acting from personal motivation, I could have simply filed a complaint and avoided public scrutiny. Instead, I chose to address a systemic problem that affected not just me, but numerous passengers and employees over years. That's not retaliation, it's leadership. Another hand, another pointed question. Sofia Rodriguez, CNN. Some critics are already suggesting this was a publicity stunt to draw attention to your acquisition. Your response? Anyone who believes I would orchestrate racial discrimination against myself for publicity clearly hasn't experienced such discrimination, Marcus replied, a rare edge entering his voice. This was not planned. It was, however, addressed decisively because the evidence supported immediate action. The questions continued for 15 minutes. Some supportive, others skeptical, all probing for weaknesses in his position. Marcus maintained his composure, neither defensive nor combative, presenting the facts with the same clarity he would use in a boardroom presentation. As the press conference concluded, Tanya stepped forward to introduce Captain Jimenez, whose measured support for the decision added crucial validation from within the pilot community. Marcus exited the podium, moving to a side room where James waited with an update. Social media response is running 80-20 in our favor, James reported, but the 20% is loud and organized. Boycott Reynolds Air is trending. The pilots' union has officially filed grievance proceedings, and there's this. He handed Marcus his tablet, displaying an email from Theodore Hammond, CEO of Globespan Airways, Transcontinental's largest competitor. The message was brief, but pointed. Marcus, bold move, but dangerous precedent. CEOs personally firing staff, sets ugly tone. Expect industry pushback. Still on for golf Thursday? Ted. Marcus handed the tablet back without comment. He had expected resistance from the old guard, the network of executives who maintained the status quo while paying lip service to diversity initiatives. There's more, James continued. William Severson just gave an interview to News Nation. They're framing him as a victim of woke corporate culture and reverse discrimination. It's gaining traction in certain circles. As expected, Marcus replied, unbothered. Has there been any physical threat assessment? Security has detected increased online chatter, but no specific credible threats. We've implemented standard protection protocols nonetheless. Marcus nodded. Throughout his career, decisive actions on racial issues had occasionally prompted threats, an unfortunate reality for prominent black executives who refused to remain silent on discrimination. The board is requesting an emergency meeting, Zoe informed him, entering with her ever-present tablet. 2 members have expressed concerns about process and optics. Schedule it for 4 this afternoon, Marcus directed, and ensure our full diversity and personnel audit results are ready for presentation. They'll back down once they see the numbers. As the team continued managing the cascading effects of the morning's events, Marcus's phone rang, a secure line from his private office. "Sir, there's a Diana Severson here to see you," his security director reported. "William Severson's wife. She's alone and has cleared initial screening." Marcus paused, considering the potential risks and benefits of such a meeting. "Have her escorted to my temporary office. Full security protocol, respectful treatment." 10 minutes later, Marcus entered the borrowed executive office to find a woman in her mid-40s waiting, her posture rigid with tension. Diana Severson had the carefully maintained appearance of someone accustomed to presenting a perfect facade to the world. Today, that facade showed cracks, her reddened eyes and tightly clasped hands betraying her emotional state. "Mrs. Severson," Marcus acknowledged, taking a seat across from her rather than behind the desk, a deliberate choice to avoid power dynamics. "I appreciate you coming, though I confess I'm somewhat surprised." "Mr. Reynolds," she began, voice steady despite her evident distress, "I'm not here to defend my husband's actions. I'm here to provide context you should have before this situation escalates further." Marcus noted her careful word choice. Context, not excuse. "I'm listening." "William has been in therapy for the past 6 months," she continued. "Anger management and bias recognition. It was my ultimatum after I witnessed a similar incident last year. He's been doing the work privately, but clearly not enough." She removed a folder from her handbag, placing it on the table between them. "These are his therapy records. I'm probably violating several confidentiality agreements by sharing them, but I believe you should know he had recognized his problem and was attempting to address it." Marcus made no move to touch the folder. "Mrs. Severson, while I respect your coming here and your husband's efforts toward self-improvement, therapy doesn't erase consequences for ongoing harmful behavior." "I'm not asking you to reinstate him," she clarified quickly. "What he did was inexcusable, regardless of context. I'm asking you to consider keeping his therapy efforts private when the media inevitably digs deeper, not for his sake, but for others who might be discouraged from seeking help if they see it used against him publicly." The request was unexpected and nuanced, not a plea for leniency but for a different kind of consideration altogether. "That's a fair point," Marcus acknowledged. "My issue is with discriminatory behavior, not with someone seeking help for recognized problems." Relief visibly washed over Diana's features. "Thank you. There's one other thing you should know. William's behavior has worsened recently because of significant stress. Our daughter, Lily, was diagnosed with leukemia 3 months ago. The medical bills..." She trailed off, composing herself. "This doesn't excuse anything. But people aren't just one thing. Even at his worst, he's still a father terrified of losing his child." Marcus absorbed this information, his expression unchanged though his perspective shifted slightly. The easy narrative of villain and hero grew more complicated, as real human stories always did. "Mrs. Severson, I'm truly sorry about your daughter. That's a burden no family should bear alone." He reached for his phone, sending a quick text before continuing. "I'll have my foundation's medical liaison contact you. They specialize in connecting families with support resources and clinical trials." Surprise registered on Diana's face. "That's very kind, considering the circumstances." "Your daughter isn't responsible for her father's actions," Marcus said simply. "As for your husband, my decision stands, but I will ensure that his therapy efforts remain private unless he chooses to discuss them publicly." As Diana Severson left, escorted by security, Marcus remained seated, contemplating the complexity of the situation. The easy path would be to maintain a simple narrative: racist pilot fired by black CEO. A clean story of justice served. The reality, as always, contained more layers, more humanity, more complications. His phone buzzed with urgent notifications. The story continued to spread, opinions hardening on all sides. Istand with Reynolds competed with Tadashka boycott Reynolds Air across social platforms. Cable news channels had found their controversy of the day. At what point does someone's discriminatory behavior become unforgivable? Should Marcus have given Captain Severson another chance considering his personal struggles and attempts at therapy? Or was his decisive action necessary to protect other passengers and employees from similar treatment? Comment number 1. If you believe second chances are important when someone is trying to change, or number 2, if you think some behaviors demand immediate consequences regardless of circumstances. Hit like if you've ever had to make a difficult decision between compassion and accountability, and subscribe to see how this story unfolds. The question now was how to maintain the moral clarity of his decision while acknowledging the human complexity behind it. As Marcus prepared for the board meeting, he knew the coming hours would test not just his authority as CEO, but his vision for what corporate leadership should truly represent in addressing discrimination, not just punitive action but transformative change. The executive boardroom at Reynolds Global headquarters in Manhattan hummed with tense energy as Marcus entered precisely at 4 o'clock. 14 faces turned toward him, the company's board of directors, connected via secure video conference, from locations across the globe. The emergency session had been called specifically to address his handling of the Severson situation, with several board members expressing concerns about methodology and potential liability. Marcus took his position at the head of the table, Zoe and Rebecca flanking him with prepared materials. He didn't begin with defense or explanation, instead opening the digital presentation displaying a comprehensive timeline of the morning's events alongside Captain Severson's redacted personnel file. Before we discuss process concerns, Marcus began, I want everyone to understand exactly what we're addressing. This isn't about a single incident of discrimination against me personally. This is about a documented pattern of behavior that previous management repeatedly ignored. Harold Winters, the longest-serving board member and former CEO of a manufacturing conglomerate, leaned forward with the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard. At 72, with silver hair and old-school Wall Street sensibilities, he represented the traditional corporate viewpoint. Marcus, no one disputes the inappropriate nature of Captain Severson's behavior, Winters began, his tone measured but pointed. The question is whether your direct intervention, particularly in such a public manner, was the appropriate response. There are established channels for addressing employee misconduct. The same channels that failed to address 7 previous complaints, Marcus countered. Harold, when systems fail repeatedly, continuing to rely on them becomes negligence. Dr. Amara Jackson, the board's newest member and president of a prestigious HBCU, spoke next. I'd like to remind everyone that Mr. Reynolds didn't simply witness discrimination, he experienced it directly while occupying his position as CEO. His response wasn't just personal, it was a leadership decision regarding conduct that violated both company policy and federal law. Several board members nodded in agreement, while others maintained skeptical expressions. The pilots' union is threatening legal action, noted Jeffrey Chen, head of the board's risk management committee. They're claiming procedural violations and creating significant negative publicity. Marcus turned to Rebecca, who smoothly took over the presentation. We've anticipated this response, she explained, displaying a new slide. Captain Severson's termination is legally defensible on multiple grounds. First, his documented pattern of discriminatory behavior created potential liability far exceeding any wrongful termination claim. Second, as CEO and controlling owner, Mr. Reynolds has explicit authority under both corporate bylaws and the airline's operations manual to relieve any employee for cause when their behavior threatens company interests. She continued methodically, outlining the legal foundation for Marcus's actions while addressing potential challenges. The presentation was thorough, clinical, and convincing. transforming an emotional issue into a matter of corporate risk management. As Rebecca concluded, the atmosphere in the room had shifted subtly. Even skeptical board members appeared more thoughtful than oppositional. Marcus reclaimed the conversation. Beyond legal considerations, we need to address the broader implications of today's events. This incident has thrust our acquisition into public awareness earlier than planned, but it's also provided an opportunity to establish our corporate values unequivocally. He displayed the next slide, early metrics on public response. Current public sentiment is running 70-30 in our favor, with strong support among younger demographics and minority communities, key growth segments for airline travel. While we've faced some backlash, the majority view sees this as appropriate accountability for discriminatory behavior. James took over, presenting the accelerated diversity audit and initial findings from employee interviews conducted throughout the day. What we're discovering is a culture at Transcontinental that systematically minimized discrimination complaints, James explained. Based on preliminary data, we've identified 27 additional cases requiring immediate review, primarily involving customer-facing personnel. The board absorbed this information with varying degrees of concern. Marcus watched their reactions carefully, some troubled by the ethical implications, others clearly calculating financial risk. "I want to be absolutely clear," Marcus stated, reclaiming the floor. This acquisition was never just about adding routes and aircraft to our portfolio. It was about transformation, creating an airline that sets new standards for equitable treatment of both passengers and employees. Today's event simply accelerated the timeline for that transformation. Harold Winters shifted uncomfortably. "Nobody disputes the importance of addressing discrimination, Marcus. The question is whether such public confrontation was necessary. Couldn't this have been handled more discreetly?" "Discretion has been the tool used to maintain discriminatory systems for decades," Marcus replied evenly. "When racist behavior is addressed privately, the message remains private. When it's addressed publicly, the message resonates throughout the organization and beyond." Dr. Jackson nodded emphatically. "There's substantial research indicating that visible accountability for discrimination creates far more significant cultural change than private reprimands, no matter how severe." For nearly 2 hours, the discussion continued. Concerns raised and addressed, legal implications analyzed, public relations strategies debated. Throughout, Marcus maintained the steady composure that had become his trademark in corporate governance, neither defensive nor combative. As the meeting concluded, the board voted 12-2 in favor of formally supporting Marcus's actions, with even Harold Winters ultimately acknowledging the legal and ethical foundations of the decision. "We'll issue a joint statement from the board supporting both the acquisition and the commitment to zero tolerance for discrimination," Dr. Jackson confirmed, having been appointed to draft the statement. As the virtual meeting ended and board members disconnected, Marcus remained seated, reviewing notes with his executive team. The board's support, while crucial, represented only one aspect of the complex situation still unfolding. "Update on operations?" he asked James. "The afternoon flights are proceeding on schedule. Captain Jimenez is handling the return leg of this morning's flight. We've had 12 passenger cancellations citing the incident, but overall bookings remain stable." "And the employee response?" "Mixed but predominantly positive," James reported. "We're seeing strong support from cabin crews and ground staff. The pilots are more divided, though several have quietly expressed support while requesting anonymity." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "And First Officer Kwan?" "She's accepted the promotion to captain," Zoe confirmed. "She's requested a meeting with you tomorrow to discuss potential improvements to training protocols." The intercom buzzed, security announcing the arrival of an unexpected visitor, Diana Washington, president of the National Coalition for Transportation Equity, a prominent advocacy organization focused on discrimination in travel. Marcus had crossed paths with Washington at various industry events, but knew her primarily by reputation. A former flight attendant who had successfully sued a major airline for racial discrimination before founding her organization. "Send her in," Marcus directed, curious about this unscheduled appearance. Diana Washington entered with purposeful energy, mid-50s, impeccably dressed, with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms much larger than this one. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, declining the offered seat. "I'll be brief. My organization has been documenting discriminatory incidents across the airline industry for 15 years. Captain Severson appears in our database 5 times. Incidents reported to us by passengers who received no satisfactory response from Transcontinental." She placed a flash drive on the table. "This contains redacted reports of 43 similar incidents across Transcontinental's operations over the past decade. Incidents that received no meaningful response from management." Marcus regarded the flash drive with interest. "Thank you for bringing this directly to me. May I ask why now?" "Because for the first time, we're seeing an airline CEO take personal responsibility for addressing discrimination rather than delegating it to PR teams and damage control specialists." Washington's expression was both challenging and hopeful. "The question is whether this was a one-time response to your personal experience or the beginning of systematic change." The echo of Captain Jimenez's earlier question wasn't lost on Marcus. "It's a fair question. The answer is that systematic change begins today. I'd like to invite you to join our newly forming Ethics and Standards Committee as an independent advisor." Washington's eyebrows rose slightly, clearly not the response she had anticipated. "You want an external watchdog organization involved in your internal processes?" "I want authentic accountability," Marcus corrected, "not performance metrics designed to create the appearance of progress while maintaining the status quo." Washington studied him carefully, perhaps looking for signs of insincerity or corporate calculation. "I'll consider it," she finally said, "but my participation would come with conditions, including unfettered access to complaint data and direct reporting to you, not intermediate management." "Accepted," Marcus replied without hesitation. "My legal team will contact you tomorrow to formalize the arrangement." After Washington departed, Rebecca turned to Marcus with an expression mixing admiration and concern. "You just gave an external advocacy organization unprecedented access to our internal operations." "I did," Marcus confirmed, "because we have nothing to hide and everything to gain from genuine transparency." James checked his phone, eyebrows rising at an incoming message. "The plot thickens. We've just received a request from 8 transcontinental captains asking to meet with you. They're calling themselves the Ethics First Group, apparently a previously underground network of pilots who've been documenting discriminatory behaviors within the ranks." Marcus's expression remained neutral, though internally he felt a surge of validation. "Schedule them for tomorrow morning, and have Tanya prepare for a follow-up press conference where we'll announce the formation of the Ethics and Standards Committee." As the team dispersed to execute these directives, Marcus found himself momentarily alone in the boardroom. He moved to the window overlooking Manhattan, watching the afternoon traffic flow far below. Thousands of individuals moving through their days, each carrying their own experiences of fairness and unfairness, of being seen or overlooked, respected or diminished. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Warily, he checked it. Security had been monitoring for threats since the morning's events. The message read simply, "Mr. Reynolds, I was a passenger in economy on this morning's flight. I'm a black teenager traveling alone for the first time. Watching you stand up to that pilot changed something for me. Thank you." No name, no further explanation needed. Marcus saved the message, a reminder of why today's actions mattered beyond corporate policies and public relations, why visible accountability for discrimination created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate situation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the pilots' union's formal response, media speculation, market analysts questioning the acquisition's stability. But today had established the foundation for something more significant than a mere corporate transition. It had demonstrated that in Reynolds Global Airlines, discrimination would face immediate consequences, regardless of rank or position. That accountability wasn't just a corporate value stated in employee handbooks, but a lived reality enforced from the highest levels. As Marcus prepared to depart for the day, Zoe approached with a final update. "Sir, we've received formal requests for interviews from 63 media outlets. How do you want to proceed? Marcus considered briefly. Select the 3 most prominent, 1 mainstream business, 1 aviation industry, and 1 focused on diversity issues. Schedule them for tomorrow afternoon after we announce the ethics committee. And the statement they're all requesting about William Severson's claim that you targeted him specifically because of his race? The truth is sufficient, Marcus replied. I didn't target him because of his race. I held him accountable because of his behavior. There's a profound difference. As the sun began to set over Manhattan, casting long shadows between the skyscrapers, Marcus gathered his materials and prepared to head home. Tomorrow would require renewed energy and focus as the story continued to evolve. But tonight, he would rest knowing that sometimes the most powerful leadership statement wasn't a memo or policy change, but a simple, direct action that demonstrated values in practice rather than theory. The message sent throughout Reynolds, global and beyond, was clear. Discrimination had consequences, accountability applied at every level, and the era of managing prejudice through private reprimands and confidential settlements was over. Morning arrived with the relentless pace of a corporate crisis still unfolding. Marcus had barely finished his first cup of coffee in his penthouse overlooking Central Park when Zoe called with updates that couldn't wait for his arrival at the office. The pilots are here early, she reported. Not just the 8 who requested the meeting, 23 captains and first officers from Transcontinental. They're waiting in the main conference room. Marcus checked his watch, 7:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Their mood? Determined but not hostile. They've requested privacy. No recording, no additional executives present. Granted, Marcus decided immediately. I'll be there in 30 minutes, and the media response overnight. Mixed but trending positive, Zoe continued. Severson gave another interview claiming discrimination against white pilots, but it's gaining limited traction. The hashtag #FlyReynoldsAir is outperforming Boycott Reynolds Air by nearly 3-1. And several civil rights organizations have issued statements supporting your actions. The board statement? Released at 6 a.m. Unanimous support for both the acquisition and your handling of the Severson situation. Market analysts are projecting a 2-point gain for our stock at opening. Marcus absorbed this information as he moved through his morning routine with practiced efficiency. 30 minutes later, his driver deposited him at the Reynolds Global headquarters, the sleek 60-story tower that housed his corporate empire. As he entered the main conference room, Marcus was struck by the scene before him. 23 airline pilots in full uniform standing as he entered. The atmosphere was charged with a peculiar energy, neither hostile nor entirely comfortable. Good morning, Marcus greeted them, moving to the head of the table but remaining standing. I understand you requested this meeting. A captain stepped forward. Late 50s with weathered features and the quiet confidence of decades in the cockpit. Mr. Reynolds, I'm Captain Michael Blackwell. I've been with Transcontinental for 28 years. We're here representing what we call the Ethics First Alliance, a group formed 3 years ago when it became clear that the official channels for addressing discrimination weren't working. Marcus nodded, waiting for him to continue. What happened yesterday with Captain Severson wasn't an isolated incident, Blackwell explained. Many of us have witnessed similar behavior, reported it through proper channels, and watched nothing happen. After a while, you either become complicit through silence or find alternative ways to address the problem. Another pilot stepped forward. Younger, Latina, with captain stripes. I'm Captain Elena Suarez. 2 years ago, I filed a formal complaint after Severson made disparaging comments about my accent during pre-flight communications. The complaint disappeared into the system. No action. Not even an acknowledgement. One by one, the pilots shared similar stories. Reports filed and ignored, concerns dismissed, unofficial workarounds developed to protect crew members and passengers from problematic captains like Severson. We developed our own internal warning system, explained a first officer named Jason Kim. Ways to alert each other when certain captains were scheduled, especially with diverse crew members. It wasn't ideal, but it was all we had. As Marcus listened, a complex picture emerged of an airline where discrimination had become normalized. not because most employees supported it, but because those who opposed it had been systematically silenced or ignored. "Why come forward now?" Marcus asked when they had finished. "Why take this risk?" Captain Blackwell exchanged glances with the others before answering. "Because for the first time we saw someone with actual power take immediate action instead of hiding behind processes designed to protect the company rather than address the problem. We're here to tell you that what you did wasn't just justified, it was necessary, and to ask what comes next." The directness of the question caught Marcus slightly off guard. These weren't employees seeking reassurance, they were professionals, asking for a concrete plan to transform a broken culture. "What comes next?" Marcus replied after a thoughtful pause, "is a complete restructuring of how discrimination complaints are handled. No more burying reports in HR processes designed to minimize corporate liability rather than address behavior. No more protecting senior staff at the expense of those with less power." He moved to the whiteboard that covered one wall of the conference room, picking up a marker. "I need your expertise," he continued, writing Ethics First Framework at the top of the board. "You've been navigating this system for years. Tell me exactly what needs to change and we'll build the new system together." For the next 2 hours, the room transformed into an intense working session. Pilots who had arrived uncertain left, energized, having contributed directly to creating new protocols for reporting, investigating, and addressing discriminatory behavior throughout the airline. As the last pilots departed, James arrived with his own updates. "The captains from this morning's meeting are already spreading the word. We're seeing a wave of support from rank-and-file employees across the airline. And the resistance? Still there, but increasingly isolated. The pilots' union has softened its position. They're now asking for fair process rather than Severson's reinstatement. And we've identified 3 other captains with similar patterns who are now under review." Marcus nodded, processing this information. "Schedule meetings with each division over the next 48 hours. I want every employee to hear directly from me about the changes we're implementing." The day unfolded at breakneck pace. Meetings with department heads, interviews with selected media outlets, strategy sessions with the executive team. By late afternoon, Marcus found himself in the corporate auditorium addressing nearly 800 employees, a mix of Reynolds Global staff and newly acquired transcontinental workers. "Yesterday morning I boarded a flight as a passenger and faced discrimination from someone who didn't know he worked for me," Marcus began, his voice carrying through the packed space without need for artificial amplification. "But this isn't about one incident or one individual. It's about the culture we're creating together." He paced across the stage, making eye contact with faces throughout the audience. "For too long, corporations have addressed discrimination through private reprimands and confidential settlements, approaches designed to minimize liability rather than change behavior. Today, we're taking a different path. We're establishing that accountability applies at every level, that no position is too senior to escape consequences for discriminatory actions." As he outlined the new Ethics First framework developed with the pilots that morning, Marcus could feel the energy in the room shifting, skepticism giving way to cautious optimism, particularly among the transcontinental employees who had navigated the previous culture for years. "This won't be perfect," Marcus acknowledged as he concluded. "We'll make mistakes in implementation. But the core principle remains non-negotiable. Every person who works for or travels with Reynolds Global Airlines deserves to be treated with equal dignity and respect, and anyone who cannot or will not uphold that standard has no place in this organization, regardless of their title, tenure, or technical skills." The applause that followed wasn't merely polite, it carried the emotional weight of people who had perhaps heard similar promises before but were choosing, cautiously, to believe that this time might be different. As the formal presentation ended and Marcus moved through the crowd, accepting handshakes and sharing brief conversations, he found himself approached by a custodial worker in a transcontinental uniform. "Mr. Reynolds," the man said quietly. "I've been with this airline for 22 years, cleaned the cockpits of planes flown by captains like Severson who wouldn't even look me in the eye. Never thought I'd see the day when someone like him would face real consequences." The simple statement, delivered without drama or elaboration, carried more validation than all the formal approvals and positive media coverage combined. By evening, Marcus found himself back in his office, reviewing the day's developments with his core team. The story had evolved significantly over 24 hours, from a dramatic confrontation to the beginning of systemic change, from individual accountability to institutional transformation. The Wall Street Journal is calling it a watershed moment in corporate responses to discrimination, Tanya reported, reviewing media coverage. Though the New York Post went with sky-high drama, CEO grounds pilot mid-career. Marcus smiled, slightly at the tabloid framing. As long as the core message gets through. Oh, it's getting through, James confirmed. We've received inquiries from 6 other major corporations asking about our ethics-first framework, apparently addressing discrimination immediately rather than burying it in processes is a novel concept. Rebecca, ever the pragmatist, provided balance. We should acknowledge that this isn't over. Severson has retained high-profile counsel. The pilots' union is still pushing back on procedural grounds, and some analysts are questioning whether such direct CEO intervention sets a sustainable precedent. All valid concerns, Marcus acknowledged. And yet, if the past 24 hours have demonstrated anything, it's that doing the right thing clearly often aligns with good business. Our stock is up, employee morale is improving, and public perception is predominantly positive. As the meeting concluded and his team departed, Marcus remained at his desk, reviewing a final report before heading home. A soft knock at his door revealed Zoe with one last update. "Sir, I thought you should see this before tomorrow." She handed him a tablet displaying an internal company forum where employees could share thoughts anonymously. The post at the top read, "Yesterday I watched our new CEO ground a plane and fire a captain for discrimination that would have been ignored last week. Today I reported an incident I've been silent about for 2 years. This is what change looks like." Below it were dozens of similar comments, employees sharing experiences previously kept private, expressing cautious hope that accountability might finally extend beyond corporate slogans into daily reality. Marcus handed the tablet back to Zoe, his expression thoughtful. "Make sure our HR team has the resources to handle the increased reporting properly. This is exactly the response we wanted, but it comes with responsibility to follow through." "Already done, sir. The expanded ethics team will be fully operational by tomorrow afternoon." As Zoe departed, Marcus turned to the window, watching. The city lights flickered to life against the darkening sky. In less than 36 hours, a routine business trip had transformed into a defining moment, not just for his newly acquired airline, but potentially for corporate America's approach to discrimination. The easy path would have been filing a complaint and allowing the system to process it at its own pace, likely resulting in no meaningful action, as it had for 7 previous complaints against Severson. The harder path meant taking direct, visible action that established clear standards and risked both personal and corporate backlash. Marcus had chosen the harder path not because it was comfortable, but because it was necessary. Because sometimes transformation required disruption, sometimes justice required directness rather than process. As he gathered his belongings to head home, Marcus reflected on his father's words that had guided so many of his decisions throughout his career. Power isn't about what you can do, it's about what you should do. Today he had used his power precisely as it should be used, not for personal vengeance, but for systemic change, not to punish one individual, but to transform an entire culture. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new resistance, new opportunities to demonstrate that this wasn't merely a one-time response, but the beginning of a fundamental shift in how discrimination was addressed within his growing corporate family. But tonight, as Marcus Reynolds stepped into the elevator that would carry him down 60 floors to the waiting car, he carried the quiet satisfaction of knowing that sometimes leadership meant more than management. It meant having the courage to act directly when systems failed, to demonstrate through personal example that equal treatment wasn't just a corporate value, but a lived reality. The elevator doors closed, beginning his descent to street level. Tomorrow, the work of transformation would continue. 3 months after the infamous flight that had sparked a corporate revolution, Marcus Reynolds stood at the podium in a hangar at JFK International Airport. Behind him gleamed the first aircraft painted in the new Reynolds Global Airlines livery. Sleek, lines of midnight blue and silver, with the company's new tagline emblazoned along the fuselage: equal respect, exceptional service. The crowd before him represented every division of the newly integrated airline: pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, maintenance technicians, customer service representatives, and corporate staff. Many wore new uniforms designed with input from those who would wear them daily, replacing the outdated and gender-restrictive designs of the former Transcontinental Airways. 90 days ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying through the vast space without strain. We embarked on a transformation that many industry experts claimed was impossible. They said changing corporate culture takes years, not months. They said addressing systemic discrimination required gradual adjustment, not immediate accountability. He paused, surveying the attentive faces before him. They were wrong. A ripple of appreciative laughter moved through the audience. In 90 days, we've implemented the ethics-first framework across all operations. We've processed and resolved 212 previously buried discrimination complaints. We've promoted 68 employees whose advancement had been artificially limited by biased evaluation systems. And we've established new industry benchmarks for diversity in senior positions, including 8 new captains who previously faced obstacles unrelated to their qualifications. Among those new captains stood Lisa Kwan, recently promoted to Director of Flight Operations, the first woman of color to hold the position in the airline's history. Our passenger satisfaction scores have increased 17%, Marcus continued. Our stock price has risen 22%, and employee retention has improved across all divisions. He stepped away from the podium, choosing to address the gathered employees more directly, but numbers don't tell the real story. The real story lies in the daily experiences of everyone who works for or travels with Reynolds Global Airlines. The real story is about creating an environment where excellence can flourish because artificial barriers have been removed. As Marcus spoke, his gaze moved across the diverse faces before him. People who had navigated discriminatory systems for years, finally experiencing a workplace designed to value their contributions equally. 3 months ago, Captain William Severson told me that people like me didn't belong in first class. Today, I want to address what happened to him, because transparency matters in this new culture we're building together. The hangar grew, quieter, employees leaning forward slightly. The Severson incident had become legendary within the company, but Marcus had rarely addressed it directly since the initial media storm. Following his termination, Captain Severson filed suit against Reynolds Global Airlines, claiming wrongful termination and reverse discrimination. Last week, that suit was withdrawn. Murmurs rippled through the audience. It was withdrawn because the evidence of his pattern of discriminatory behavior was overwhelming. It was withdrawn because 7 previous complaints that had been buried under former management were finally properly investigated. It was withdrawn because doing the right thing, addressing discrimination directly rather than hiding it in processes, isn't just morally correct, it's legally defensible. Marcus paused, his expression softening slightly. What hasn't been reported publicly, and what I share now with Captain Severson's permission, is that he has since engaged in intensive bias recognition therapy. He has personally apologized to 5 former colleagues and 3 passengers who experienced discrimination under his command, and he has begun working with aviation schools to educate future pilots about the importance of equal treatment in the cockpit and beyond. The revelation clearly surprised many in the audience. The narrative of villain and hero had become more nuanced, as real human stories always did. People can change, Marcus continued. Systems can change. Industries can change, but that change rarely happens without a catalyst, without someone willing to take direct action even when it's uncomfortable or unprecedented. He gestured toward the gleaming aircraft behind him. Today, we're not just revealing a new aircraft livery or celebrating improved financial metrics. We're establishing a new standard for how corporations address discrimination, not through committees and confidential processes designed to protect the organization at the expense of individuals, but through direct accountability, applied equally at every level. The applause that followed wasn't the polite corporate acknowledgement of a CEO's speech, but the genuine response of people who had witnessed meaningful change in their daily work lives. As the formal presentation concluded and employees moved forward to explore the new aircraft and connect with colleagues from different divisions, Marcus found himself approached by Diana Washington, the transportation equity advocate who had joined Reynolds Global's ethics committee as an independent advisor. "Impressive results," she acknowledged, nodding toward the statistical displays highlighting the company's transformation. "Though I'm still watching for backsliding once the spotlight fades." Marcus smiled at her characteristic directness. "I'd expect nothing less. External accountability remains essential." "The industry is taking notice," Washington continued. "3 other airlines have contacted us about implementing similar frameworks. Your approach is creating ripples beyond your own organization." "That was always the goal," Marcus replied. "Changing one airline matters. Changing how an entire industry addresses discrimination matters more." As Washington moved away to speak with other employees, Marcus found himself momentarily alone, observing the scene before him. The integrated teams, the animated conversations, the sense of genuine camaraderie that had replaced the fractured culture he had inherited. His phone vibrated with an incoming message, a text from his father. "Watching the live stream. Your mother would have been proud. So am I." The simple message carried profound meaning. Joseph Reynolds had built his small trucking company in Saitama, 1970s Georgia, despite facing discrimination at every turn. He had taught Marcus that success wasn't measured solely by personal achievement, but by creating space for others to follow. By establishing new standards that benefited not just oneself, but an entire community. Another figure approached, Elena Suarez, one of the pilots who had shared her story of filing ignored complaints against Severson. Now wearing captain's stripes, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who no longer needed to navigate around institutional bias. "Mr. Reynolds," she greeted him, "I wanted to share something before you leave. Last week I flew with a young black girl in the jump seat, part of our new youth aviation program. When I told her about what happened 3 months ago, about how you grounded the plane and fired a pilot for discrimination, she said, 'So that's what power is supposed to be used for.'" The anecdote struck Marcus deeply, the simplicity of a child's understanding cutting through corporate complexity to the essential truth. Power wasn't meant for self-protection or perpetuating broken systems. It was meant for creating positive change, for establishing new standards, for removing barriers that limited human potential. As the event concluded and employees dispersed to their various responsibilities, Marcus found himself standing alone beside the newly painted aircraft, running his hand along its sleek surface. From a purely business perspective, the acquisition had proven more successful than even the most optimistic projections. From a human perspective, the transformation had created a workplace where excellence could flourish without artificial limitations. His phone buzzed with a reminder, a board meeting in 30 minutes to discuss the next phase of expansion. The work continued, the challenges evolved, but the fundamental principle remained constant. Equal respect wasn't just a slogan on an aircraft or a line in a mission statement. It was a standard applied through actions, demonstrated through decisions, upheld through consistent accountability. 3 months ago, Marcus Reynolds had been denied a first-class seat by a pilot who didn't recognize him as the airline's new owner. That pilot had been fired within 12 minutes, setting in motion a transformation that extended far beyond one incident or one individual. The simple greeting carried the weight of transformation, not just for one airline but potentially for an entire industry, not just for one CEO, but for every passenger and employee who deserved equal respect regardless of appearance or background. Marcus took his seat, fastened his seatbelt, and prepared for takeoff, both literally and figuratively, into a future where discrimination faced immediate consequences regardless of rank or position. The aircraft engines hummed to life, beginning the journey skyward. This story highlights a powerful truth about confronting racism in corporate America. Change requires more than policies. It demands courageous action. Marcus Reynolds didn't just respond to discrimination personally experienced. He seized an opportunity to transform an entire corporate culture by demonstrating that accountability applies at every level, regardless of position or power. True leadership means having the moral courage to address injustice directly, rather than hiding behind processes designed to minimize liability rather than maximize fairness. When systems repeatedly fail to address discrimination, continuing to rely on those systems becomes complicity. The transformation at Reynolds Global Airlines reminds us that inclusive environments aren't created through mission statements or diversity initiatives alone, but through consistent enforcement of standards that value human dignity. It shows that addressing racism directly isn't just morally correct, it's also good business. Perhaps most importantly, this story demonstrates that one person with authority willing to take a principled stand can catalyze change that extends far beyond a single incident, creating ripples that transform not just one company, but potentially an entire industry's approach to discrimination. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered if speaking up would make a difference? Would you have the courage to take immediate action like Marcus did, or would you follow the safe path of traditional procedures? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe accountability for racism should apply at every level of an organization, hit that like button to support this message. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and transformation in the workplace. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that sometimes doing what's right means disrupting comfortable systems. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the fight against discrimination, your voice and actions matter more than you realize. Together, we can create workplaces where everyone is treated with equal dignity and respect.